Committee will come to order. We welcome not only our witnesses but guests who have shown up here today. I thank my colleagues for being here in the last few weeks of this Congress before adjourning for the election. There's an awful lot of things going on. I think members will be coming and going, but we're really pleased to be able to have this opportunity to have the three stellar witnesses before us. Looking toward ending 34 years of public service, I was going through some, cleaning out some drawers, and I came across a press release that I had issued in, I hate to even mention the year, 1982, when Senator Gregg and I were both members of the House of Representatives. And I started reading through it a little nostalgically. It was titled, "The Federal Deficit, Can It Be Controlled?" And this was a message in August 16th of 1982. And in this message, I recognized the fact that it was necessary for us to address uncontrolled mandatory spending if we were ever going to get our budget in deficit and ever going to get to a point where the situation was under control, since we had no ability statutorily on a budgetary basis, on a year-to-year basis, in addressing mandatory spending. I suggested that some reforms needed to be made, or this needed to be addressed, or we would plunge into deficits year after year, which would put a burden on our debt limits and significant borrowing. I raised the point that at the time, mandatory spending on Medicare was an astonishing $46 billion a year. We're now looking at somewhere near or over $600 billion a year just for this one mandatory program alone. I won't even go into all the details on Social Security and Medicaid and other mandatory programs. And so here we are in 2016, and despite numerous attempts over decades to address this issue, we're still talking about this as an issue, and obviously it has come to the point where serious action needs to be taken before serious consequences set in. It's no longer a question of if we need to do this. I think the question of when we should do it can be answered by 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, or 1 year ago, but it's not being done, and it hasn't been done. CBO, on an annual basis, more than an annual basis, warns us of the coming fiscal catastrophe, and yet it is discussed for a day or two on the floor of the House and floor of the Senate, and then we move on to the business of the day. I'm not here to point fingers at either party. I'm here to basically say Congress has not achieved the will to take necessary steps. Administrations, Republican and Democrat, have not been able to accomplish a coordinated effort on this, and the warnings are dire. We're all aware of the CBO warnings, but this is not just a conservative or not just a nonpartisan basis conclusion as to what's happening here. The Urban Institute, certainly not a conservative institute, has warned that in less than 10 years, we will be at a point where 98.3% of all federal revenues are spent on entitlements, mandatory spending. That leaves 1.5% or so for everything else the federal government does. So regardless of what your interest is, whether it's building roads, medical research, basic research, the arts, national defense, national security, FBI, CIA, given the threats that we have, no matter what your particular interest is, there will not be money to address it without going further and further and further into debt to pay for those functions. Clearly, that's unsustainable. It has national security implications. Former Joint Chief Staff and Navy Admiral Michael Mullins rightfully noted that, and I quote, "The most significant threat to our national security is our debt." So here we are. We have a stellar cast of witnesses this morning, which I will be introducing here shortly. But it's important to note that during election season or year after year after year, this thing keeps getting pushed away, pushed down. It'll be the next president, the next Congress. We can't deal with it now. And we've been saying this for decades. The point of reckoning, the day of reckoning, is coming. It seems to me that there has basically been only two paths to successfully address this. One is extraordinary leadership, bipartisan leadership. Think back to 1984 when Ronald Reagan picked up the phone, called Tip O'Neill and said, "Tip, we got a problem with Social Security. And if we don't address it, we're in real trouble. And we need to take it above politics." And there, standing outside in of the White House, was the President of the United States, the Senate Majority Leader, the Speaker of the House, and the leaders of the two political parties, saying, "We're taking this out of politics, we're imposing this plan." We bought about 30 years of solvency for the Social Security program. We have not seen that since. Secondly, unfortunately, the alternative has been fiscal crisis. Think EU, think Greece. This is unsustainable, and the markets will dictate where we go. There may be a third way, and I've introduced this morning a legislation that will impose a civilian BRAC, similar to the military BRAC, when it was impossible to close any of over 1,000 bases that were no longer needed. They built many of them in World War II, and afterward, we finally turned it over to a nonpartisan commission that went through under some guidance and presented a proposal to the Congress for an up or down vote only. It has been an extraordinary success in terms of forcing action that had not been taken by either the Congress or by administrations. And I won't go into the details of that, except we do have a model that may allow us an opportunity to address this significant problem.